During the PS3 generation, Grin was known for many different projects. They worked on the PC version of Ghost Recon Advanced Warfighter 1 and 2, along with being the developer that was part of the Bionic Commando revival. During this time, the studio was working on 3 different projects at once. They had an opportunity to work on a movie tie-in game for Terminator Salvation, along with an opportunity to make a big-budget sequel for the Bionic Commando series, and a third game that was going to act as a sequel to the action film Wanted. While Grin was developing several games at once, for Wanted they aimed to capture the action from the film, along with making the bullet curving an important part of the experience. Join me as we take a look back at Wanted: Weapons of Fate. Grin was given the opportunity to make a game based on the movie Wanted. The film featured over-the-top action sequences with bullet curving being a key element of them. While the film was still being made, Grin had the opportunity to see many of the action scenes and were interested in the source material. The studio had a good relationship with the publisher, which resulted on them having the necessary time to get their game right. The developers could not have the game ready for when the film came out, so it was released several months after the film. This ensured that the developers were not rushed during their development. The goal of the project was to make a game that could stand on its own. While the game took influences from the film, the developers wanted the gameplay to feel like a love child between Gears of War and Max Payne. During the development, Grin knew that they were going to need to spend a lot of time getting the bullet curving mechanic right. This was a huge part about the film and was never seen in a video game at the time. This was both exciting and challenging as Grin was able to show off this new mechanic not used in a video game before, along with the pressure of maintaining the visual representation from the film. They also did not want this mechanic to have a long learning curve to it either. While developing the bullet curving mechanic, Grin wanted to make sure that it was fun to do while also being very accessible to the player. Essentially, they wanted it to feel like something that wasn't jarring to use. If possible, they hoped that Wanted would allow Grin to be known as the developer that did something unique with the bullet curving mechanics. During the development of this, they started out with letting the player actually control the bullet, but this ended up being very cumbersome to control. So this is what led to the developers having a lock-on system that the player could then use to determine how to make their shot. Wanted aimed to capture how fast and agile an assassin can be. This was important when figuring out the movements within the game. The shooting was going to focus on a cover system while having cover-to-cover mechanics to easily move between different positions. One important aspect from the Wanted comic that they wanted to include was the killer suit, and this was not featured in the film, and the developers jumped at the opportunity. The game's story was going to pick up where the film ended, and the writers wanted to retain the one-liners that were used in the film. The main narrative was going to follow both Wesley in the present and cross through the flashbacks. Also, the team was able to work with Mark Miller, who wrote the comic, and the people involved with the development of the film. During the early stages of development, the studio toyed with the idea of including multiplayer, but ultimately decided that it would feel tacked on to the entire experience. Another idea that was abandoned was a potential mechanic of being able to dodge enemy bullets by curving the bullets like in the film. The studio had a hard time figuring out a way to properly implement this idea without it hurting the pacing of the game. This was where the interactive QuickTime events came into play, where the player controls the weapon and shoots at enemies and needs to stop the enemy bullets in midair. Wanted: Weapons of Fate was shaping up to be a fun third-person shooter that captured the spirit of the film. In March 2009, Wanted: Weapons of Fate was released to the world. Wanted's gameplay centered around third-person shooting. This is a very focused game. The movement here is pretty good. You can easily enter into cover. While in cover, you can quickly move to another position by targeting another piece of cover that is either in front or to the left and right of you. This makes for a smooth transition and mostly protected while moving. The regular shooting is your standard third-person cover combat with some nice touches. For the most part, the guns sound decent with some nice impact when you hit someone. This usually results in some nice blood splatters. You do have a few different options while in combat. If you want to get into a better position or flank the enemy, you can blind fire and the enemy will be suppressed so that you can more easily flank them. This is really useful on shielded foes. If an enemy gets too close, you can opt to kill them instantly with your melee attack. The melee is really useful, but it also leaves you open for others to shoot at you. The first level of the game has you playing around with the controls, completing some expected shootouts, and getting introduced to the story. For the most part, this is all fun, but pretty standard stuff. Once you earn the ability to curve bullets, then things start to get interesting. At this point in Wanted, the game keeps the consistent and fun cover shooting and adds in those specific elements to give it that Wanted flavor. Curving bullets is very easy to do and very fun as well. Essentially, you target an enemy and then find the right angle so that your bullet can hit your target. This will kill most of the regular enemies with one shot. For enemies with a little bit more health, the curved bullet will cause the enemy to leave cover, making them open to your hits. Curving the bullet is really satisfying, especially when the game goes into slow-mo as you travel with the bullet to the target. Now, once you earn 2 pieces of adrenaline, you can perform a slow-mo dash. To do this, you first need to be into cover and then target another piece of cover, but instead of using the cover-to-cover mechanics, you need to hit another button. While in this state, everything is slowed down and you can usually kill more than one enemy at a time. This is really useful when you're up against several enemies who are closing in on you. Both of your options are really great and provide some nice style to the combat. Essentially, the bullet curving is useful for focusing on one target, while the slow-mo dash is good for several enemies. The combat has a pretty nice flow to it of staying in cover, moving to different positions, and then using your powers to defeat all of the enemies. Outside of the powers, there really isn't anything new here, but the game does do a good job of providing a fun and engaging shooting experience, especially for fans of the film. Now, in order to use your powers, you will need adrenaline. For example, curving a bullet takes 1 adrenaline to perform, while a slow-mo dash takes 2. You will earn 1 circle of adrenaline from killing an enemy. You can even earn this from one of your curved bullet kills as well. So gun kills will net you with 1 circle, and melee kills will provide you with 2. When it comes to the different weapons you will use, the arsenal is pretty limited. You have a few different pistols and dual SMGs that you can use later on. While curving a bullet with these guns, the rounds are explosive, and this is great for taking out several enemies at once. For most of the enemies that you will fight, they will be armed with pistols, but there are a few others that have some variety to them. The shotguns are deadly and can take you out pretty quick. Then you have the melee rushers that can instantly kill you unless you mash the melee button and quickly counter them. There are some other sections to help provide some variety to the gameplay as well. There are sniping sections, which are essentially rail shooting stages where you need to defend someone and take out the targets for them. There's a few turret sections, and these function how you would expect. The most fun of these different sections are the QuickTime event-like sequences. Here you will be treated to some stylized action along with aiming your gun, shooting at enemies, and hitting enemy bullets before they get to you.
Show these French fried fuckers how it's done.
The QuickTime stuff is the best of the other 3 forms of gameplay, but the game is at its best when it's just focused on the cover shooting. Taking out enemies, curving bullets, and managing your adrenaline is really fun. Some of the environments have some nice details like destructible objects, and if you can get around an enemy, you can use them as a human shield. There are some decent unlocks as well, like different outfits and alternative mode options for the campaign. But outside of the very brisk but good campaign, this is about what the game has to offer. If you are a fan of the film, then you will probably enjoy the story. It picks up after the ending of the film. I like this since it let the developers have some freedom to make their own story based on the film's ending, but not needing to do a one-for-one of the film. The best parts about the story are Wesley's crude, funny lines. Sadly, James McAvoy did not reprise his role from the film, but the sound alike is pretty good. What I did enjoy about the narrative was how it was structured. The story bounces back between present day with Wesley and then going back in time to the past with Cross. During Cross's sections, we get background on Wesley and his family. Do not expect an in-depth narrative, but it is consistently enjoyable. The CGI cutscenes are pretty good as well. As an overall package, Wanted is a great example of a perfect weekend rental. Short and sweet and a lot of fun. Like I said, I really enjoyed this game, but it does have a decent amount of flaws within it. One thing that looks very cheap are all the in-engine cutscenes. This looks like crap and they're very ugly. The aiming can be a bit odd since it uses aiming acceleration. So if you're aiming right or left for a bit, the speed will pick up while you're turning. I hate this type of stuff since it can really hurt your precision, but it isn't really that annoying here. Most of the shooting will have you in a stationary position and you will pop in and out of cover to fire. So while in combat, you will never be aiming consistently for a long period of time. It's a lot of quick shots. Essentially, you will be aiming, but never for an extended period of time before going back into cover. The acceleration doesn't really become an issue for most of the fights, but in the instances that it does, you will wish that the controls in the shooting were just a bit more refined to avoid any of this. While I did appreciate that boss fights were included in the game, they are mostly the same fight reused over and over again. During these fights, you will need to try and get your adrenaline up so that you can hurt the boss and get them out of cover. There isn't really much variation here, and while these fights are not the worst that I have played, they needed more variety. I think a big missed opportunity was not having any more guns in the game. Enemies have machine guns and shotguns, and it would have been fun to use some of these weapons even if bullets could not be curved with them. The turret sections in this game are awful. No matter what difficulty you are on, these parts are difficulty spikes. You will easily die during these sections, making them not that enjoyable. You can hide behind the turret's cover, or if all of the cover is broken, you can look up at the sky and not take any damage. These sections do not feel play tested. Thankfully, they are short. Now, I am all for a lean and direct experience. Wanted is a brisk 4 hours long, but there are elements about the game that lack refinement, and either way, I wish that it had additional modes to enjoy. One mode that seemed like an easy addition would have been to include a single-player horde mode of some kind. There could have been challenges to complete and rewards tied to them. While I have my issues with Wanted, I cannot ignore that every time I play this game, I have a great time with it. It is a solid third-person shooter with some nice touches from the film. I just wish that there was more content to enjoy. Wanted Weapons of Fate is a short and sweet third-person shooter. The shooting is very enjoyable, and the few different powers that you get to use are great as well. I never got tired of curving bullets, and when my kill went into slow-mo, this just added another nice touch to the game. The music in this game is mostly reused tracks from the film, and since Danny Elfman did a good job with it, this isn't really a bad thing here. The story is decent with some nice CGI cutscenes. There are a few other areas that could have used refinement, from the aiming acceleration, the in-engine cutscenes, among others. But while Wanted does not last very long, it is very fun from beginning to end. If you haven't tried this and you're looking for a nice weekend rental type of experience, then I would highly recommend you check this one out. Thank you very much for watching.